Good morning, and thanks for coming to this session of the Electric and Hybrid Marine Conference for North America. My name is Morgan Brown, and I'm going to be talking about green city ferries and how new technology, economics, and innovative financing are making zero-emission, fast pedestrian ferries viable today. Climate change, the Paris Agreement of 2015, the recently completed COP26 conference in Glasgow, seems like a daily stream of headlines and demonstrations on climate change. Infrastructure bill recently being passed that addresses climate resilience. I don't think anybody in this virtual room probably didn't get the memo that climate change is important. Positive news is the public awareness and the business environment have caught up on the need for action today. For those of us in the transportation industry, this is an acute responsibility. Transportation is one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. Fast ferries have a challenge with climate change. They consume a lot of energy, they create a lot of emissions, they cost a lot to operate. Is there a future for fast ferries? I'm going to be bold and say fast ferries are the future because they're a great alternative to cars. Expanding or building new highways costs billions of dollars and is extremely disruptive to communities. Whereas on the water, the capacity is available and it's essentially free. It's a very efficient way to move people. We're moving people, not cars. And people like it. I'm going to use my neighborhood here in the Pacific Northwest to illustrate the opportunity for pedestrian fast ferries. You can see we're surrounded by water here, the Pacific Ocean, the Salish Sea, and if I zoom in on the Seattle area, you can see a lot of water. In fact, Seattle is surrounded by the Puget Sound saltwater on the west and a large lake, Lake Washington freshwater on the east. Given this geography, it makes sense that Washington State ferries are one of the largest ferry systems in the world. But if you take a close look at this poster, you can see they're large boats designed for moving cars around. It didn't used to be that way. If you go back less than 100 years ago, the way people got around in the Puget Sound was with the famous Mosquito Fleet, an army of steamers that took cargo and passengers all over the area in a much more efficient way than was possible over land. I'm particularly fond of this picture from 1910, showing passengers disembarking from a steamer coming from my island of Vashon over to the Seattle side. It's hard to find good maps from the time, but if you take a look at these two from 1908 and 1909 and you look really closely, you can see to the left all the different lines for moving people around Puget Sound to the west of Seattle, and on the right, Lake Washington to the east of Seattle. Fast forward to today, and we can see from this map to the left that there's a start of a new pedestrian mosquito fleet in the Puget Sound. My island, Vashon to the south, has had a fast ferry connection to downtown Seattle for more than 15 years. New routes have been added in the last few years, and one is coming online next year. But if we look at this map here to the right, we see a lot of dots. The Puget Sound Regional Council has studied routes from all of these different locations that have expressed interest. So what's holding it up? Let's take a look at that from another perspective with the flight I've arranged here on Google Earth. I hope I don't get anyone nauseous. Zooming into the Seattle area, the Puget Sound, you can see the saltwater to the west and the freshwater Lake Washington to the east. Seattle has had two fast pedestrian routes to West Seattle and to Vashon Island for about 15 years. Kitsap County has recently added 3 new routes, but there are many communities that have expressed an interest and are being studied. On Lake Washington, there are 2 routes that are being looked at seriously right now, but historically there were a lot, and there's a lot of communities that are looking at doing this. Zooming out to the greater Salish Sea, here are just some routes that I've mapped up, the purple ones being the greater distances for hydrogen, but all possibilities of moving people around efficiently with zero emissions on the water. So with all this community interest, what's holding things up? First, it's the operating costs, what it takes the transportation authorities and the private operators to keep this service available to the public in a financially viable way. Next, it's the sizable capital costs required to get the vessels in the first place and the shoreside infrastructure, and in many cases the time, energy, and effort to successfully apply for the federal grants. And increasingly, it's the emissions, the greenhouse gases, diesel fast ferries being one of the largest transportation mode emitters per passenger mile. Fortunately, technology is evolving very rapidly to address these challenges today, particularly batteries. Let's take a look.
The way we look at transportation today is changing. The climate needs us to find greener alternatives, and increased activity in the cities needs us to be more effective. Most cities are situated by water, but so far the waterborne alternative hasn't been able to compete with what's happening on the ground. To be attractive, a commuter ferry must be able to offer more frequent departures, shorter travel time, pleasant experiences, and no emissions. Many modern high-speed ferries do fulfill these demands, except for the emissions. In fact, every hour, a modern 150-passenger catamaran consumes 300 liters of diesel with harmful emissions. In 2016, Green City Ferries launched the BB Green prototype, a high-speed passenger ferry with no emissions. It is the fastest electric passenger ferry in the world, and because of its energy efficiency, its cost of operations is much lower than any fossil ferry. While a diesel engine uses only 1/3 of the energy for propulsion, the electric motor uses over 90%. Furthermore, BB Green's extreme hull efficiency is due to its planing on an air cushion, lifting it up partially from the water and significantly reducing the size of the wakes. The batteries that power BB Green are newly developed high-performance batteries, and they have a guaranteed lifetime of at least 10 years and hits full charge in less than 10 minutes. Following this prototype comes the new BB Green 24. Its design is meant to challenge us to rethink public transportation into something more fun and different. It carries up to 147 passengers plus bikes and has a top speed of 35 knots.
A quick review of the Green City Ferries backstory. In 2014, Green City Ferries came out with the world's first supercharged passenger ferry, able to recharge in just 10 minutes. In 2016, with EU grants, they developed an electric fast ferry prototype, the BB Green, the world's fastest supercharged passenger ferry. Building on all of this experience, in 2021, Green City Ferries came out with the electric fast ferry commercial vessel, the Beluga 24, together with Technicraft on the foil-assisted hull and Studio Scully from Italy on the design of the interior and the rest of the boat. Carries 150 passengers and goes up to 35 knots and can run either on batteries or fuel cells. Let's take a closer look at the Beluga 24. Just recently received its first 2 contracts. It's under production and will be delivered in just over a year in 2023. It features flexible loading with either bow loading in the front, as pictured here, or in the front and the rear from the side. It also can carry up to 28 bikes. Solar panels on the roof, outdoor seating, and an ultra-low wake. Key dimensions include a height of 15 feet, or a special version at 14 feet for getting under bridges in urban settings, extreme beam of 31 feet, and a maximum draft of just under 6 feet, with the dynamic foil when applied being about 1.5 feet higher than that, protected to a certain degree in between the 2 hulls of the catamaran. Features in the cabin area include a self-serve cafeteria, seating for handicapped, 2 restrooms, baggage area, crew lounge, Wi-Fi, large flat screens, and space for 28 bicycles. From plan view, we can see again the flexible boarding from the bow and front and from the side, fore and aft, the space for storage of 28 bicycles, the crew lounge area in the cabin, disabled seating, 2 restrooms, and the self-serve cafeteria, and seating outside. 4 key technologies are driving this new green economics. Carbon fiber, which is both lighter and stronger, foil-assisted hull, which reduces the friction in the water, and marine LTO batteries, really the game changer that reduce the operating costs and allow ferry schedules to not wait for charging. And then, for greater distances, marine fuel cells, hydrogen, for longer routes. Since batteries weigh a lot, energy efficiency with weight is critical. Carbon fiber has the advantage that it weighs 30% less than aluminum. So what you get out of that is something like 15% less energy needed for propulsion. It also happens to be stronger and safer and has less maintenance than aluminum. Reducing friction is critical to getting heavy batteries on a fast ferry. A foil-assisted catamaran does this by lifting the hull partially out of the water. There's less water to move aside, and there's less friction in air than in water. As a result, this design uses 35% less energy than a standard catamaran. And it's a proven Technocraft design out of New Zealand, with over 150 boats successfully using earlier versions of this design. Green City Ferries has exclusive license to the Technocraft design for carbon fiber fast ferries. Other foil-assisted benefits include an ultra-low wake and a more comfortable ride. What you get with this design is essentially most of the advantages of a full hydrofoil without the limitations of the greater complexity, the deep draft, and potential collisions with marine mammals and other debris and deadheads in the water. The principal benefit of batteries versus diesel engines is the energy efficiency you get with an electric motor. 90% of it is used for propulsion. With new technology, it's also possible now to do routes of up to 23 nautical miles for electric fast ferries. The benefits that come with the LTO marine batteries that Green City Ferries uses versus the conventional NMC lithium-ion batteries is that LTO charges 3 times faster. Supercharging allows you to basically keep your ferry schedules and charge just during the time it takes to load and unload passengers. They also last 5 times longer, which makes their life cycle cost less, and they can be sold for storage facilities afterwards. And because they don't form dendrites, they're also safer, don't catch fire, a big advantage on boats. For longer routes, hydrogen fuel cells offer energy efficiency benefits over diesel. They're 50% more efficient. These marine systems are also cost efficient. They're engineered for 10-year life cycle. Hydrogen is more expensive than electricity, but it does allow zero-emission ferry service for longer routes, and the costs will drop. The combination of these technologies creates a virtuous circle. By being very efficient, we reduce energy consumption, which allows us to use batteries. The batteries, in turn, allow us to use an electric motor and reduce energy consumption. Carbon fiber reduces the weight. Foil-assisted catamaran reduces the friction in the water, allowing us to use batteries and reduce the energy. I'm going to use this table to illustrate some of the strengths and weaknesses of different energy sources. First, with density. Diesel is very dense, has the great advantage of filling up a tank and getting all the way across the ocean. Batteries, not so much. Not very dense, therefore you need a lot of weight and can't go great distances. Hydrogen, very lightweight, very energy dense, and a lot of potential therefore. But when we move to the efficiency of the motors, this changes around a bit. Fossil fuel engines have the disadvantage that 2/3 of the energy go into heating the engine room. Whereas batteries, an electric motor, has the great asset of almost all of the energy going into propulsion. Hydrogen's somewhere there in the middle, but electricity certainly wins with motors on efficiency. In terms of cost, the cost of diesel fuel is one of the greatest operating costs for ferry operation, and the price is variable and unpredictable. Electricity, batteries provide electricity, which is relatively much less expensive and a lot more stable. Hydrogen is very expensive right now, but there's some expectation, obviously, as the infrastructure develops, that it'll go down in price. Future costs with future trends, it's expected then that renewable energy and hydrogen will become increasingly less expensive. Let's take a look at the green economics that make it possible to have zero emissions and 80% less fuel costs. A 150 passenger diesel aluminum catamaran at 25 knots will use 140 kilowatt hours and cost about $12.40 per nautical mile. The Beluga 24 with 150 passengers at 25 to 30 knots will use 30 kilowatt hours and cost about $2.26 per nautical mile. How we came up with that? Essentially, we take that 140 kilowatt hours from an aluminum diesel catamaran, we multiply that by a 15% gain in the reduced weight with the carbon fiber, a 35% reduction from the friction of the foil-assisted catamaran, and a 2/3 reduction in the electric motor versus a diesel motor, winds up getting us to that rounded up 30 kilowatt hours. So what does this mean in hard cash dollars for an operator trying to make it work? In an analysis done for the Stockholm regional government, they determined that a fast ferry operating for 2,000 hours a year would spend $605,000 on diesel. An electric fast ferry Beluga 24 boat would use $121,000, a reduction of 80%. What about the challenge with a car? It costs a lot of money to get a car into the city every day. You have to pay for the gasoline, a congestion tax in the case of Stockholm, parking, I wish it was only that much in Seattle, and you come up with a pretty good sum every day. A ferry ticket's going to cost less, and it's more reliable, and it's probably a lot more pleasant. I'm going to bring up the example of the Stockholm Climate Challenge and the Boat Plan Stockholm 2025 proposal, because it illustrates some really exciting things having to do with the financing of green infrastructure and how we might be able to move faster in the direction towards zero emissions. Stockholm's like Seattle. You see a big city with a lot of people, you see a lot of water, you see islands, so clearly there's a lot of potential. The regional government in Stockholm manages their historic ferry fleet, the Vaxholmsbolaget, which carries more than 4 million people per year. They have a lot of old boats and they use up a lot of diesel and they put out a lot of carbon emissions. Boat Plan 2025 recommends retrofitting 27 vessels to zero emissions and buying 23 new high-speed vessels that run on batteries or fuel cells for a total investment of 150 million euro. Switching to zero emission doesn't have to cost Stockholm anything. In fact, it can save them money. If they keep the status quo, they have certain capital costs, certain energy costs, and it adds up to $39 million a year. If they invest in a zero emission fleet, their capital costs go up per year, but their energy costs go down dramatically, such that the actual operating costs per year have been reduced. And the exciting part about this investment is that it comes from pension funds. Infranode, the largest broker of institutional pension funds in Scandinavia, is very excited about this investment in green infrastructure. In fact, worldwide, there's a lot of interest in green transportation infrastructure. There's more details on this that I think you'll find interesting. Take a look at this website or simply Google Boat Plan Stockholm 2025. Why the financing interest in fast ferries? Well, there's been two big game changers. First of all, it's the zero emissions. Diesels use a lot, electric fast ferries eliminate it, so it looks good very much for their portfolio. And second, it's saving a buck. The lower operating costs for electric ferries change the financial game. Green City Ferries brings it all together as a systems integrator. In addition to the leading edge zero-emission fast ferry technology we've discussed, we also need to address the shoreside infrastructure, the charging stations, even the docks and the pontoons themselves, and the permitting to make it happen. And by bringing private financing to the table for public transportation, we create the very attractive situation where operators could need no upfront capital costs and would be able to get the latest zero-emission technology in return for long-term contracts. And in trying to look at ways to go faster and more flexible than traditional public transportation authority procurement processes, we're very interested in looking at creative financing and operations possibilities. Thank you for your attention. If you have any further questions or are interested in discussion, I look forward to that in our Q&A session this afternoon. Have a great day.